The reason why I'm talking about this too is because not only are they very different challenges that we start with, the activities that we then do as part of product discovery look fundamentally different. Pretty keen to take you through this topic. We'll talk about explore versus exploit. We're going to talk a bit about how I've basically taken this and applied it to discovery and why it's so important. So I've got a few things inside all of that we're going to go through. And whilst, awesome, you can hear me, whilst everyone else is still joining as well and the numbers tick up, for those who are new here and might be the first time you are joining one of these webinars and you're wondering who I am and why are we speaking, my name's Ant Murphy. I might switch this screen just so it's a little bit bigger for you. This one. I'm Ant. I'm a product coach. I'm in Sydney, for those who are wondering where I am. So hi to everybody who is in Sydney. I'm also the founder of Product Pathways, which is what this beautiful neon sign behind me is, which is a logo that is real. And a little bit more about Product Pathways in a second, but I've been hosting these webinars each month. That's all part of the reason why I became a coach. The reason why I started Product Pathways is all because I truly believe that the products that we build and we create can have a meaningful impact on the world. I kind of got to this point in my career where I thought the most rewarding thing I could do, and I'm glad I took this plunge, is to actually go and help people get better at product and help people equip you with all the knowledge and skills to be able to build great products that we all get to benefit from. And Product Pathways is all focused on that mission. Product Pathways at the moment is just a bunch of self-paced learning content at the moment, but I've got plenty of other things in the works that we're building out there. And these webinars are all part of that mission as well. So this is part of Product Pathways. And if you are new here and you've missed some past webinars, you can find all of them over on YouTube as well. If you get onto YouTube, find Product Pathways. And there's plenty of free content in there as well, because I want to try and create as much content as possible to help you be great at products. So that includes all of the YouTube stuff as well. So there's some good videos. Hopefully they delivered some good value to them, I hope. But you can also find all the previous webinars there. So this will be recorded, and yes, this will end up on YouTube as well. So cool. We're not here to talk about Product Pathways though. We're here to talk about explore versus exploit. So we're going to go through a few things. I'm going to talk for probably about 20 odd minutes. It's the normal format with all of this. So I normally go through about 20 minutes of content. We'll cover the topic that we're trying to go through today, which is all about explore versus exploit. We're going to talk about what do I mean by these two? How does it apply to product discovery? Why is it different? Like, what do I mean when I say that we need to think differently between these? How to kind of build these constructs in your organization, the right balance between them. And then after that, we'll do a Q&A. So I'll be able to answer your questions. And that's one of the biggest benefits of doing these type of webinars is I get to answer your questions live and we can have this kind of interaction. And hopefully, if anything is not clear, anything doesn't make sense and you want to get more out of it, ask a question. We can help contextualize it and hopefully give you more value out of it. So cool. That's all the admin out of the way. Let's get into it. And I want to start, before I dive into explore versus exploit, I want to start with just talking a little bit about product discovery and a little bit of first principles around product discovery, just so then we're on the same page. And this is important because I think it frames what I'm going to get into next. So fundamentally, if you break product discovery down, first principles, to me, this is how I break it down. It's all about reducing risk. Now, why is it about reducing risk and how do we reduce risk? Well, when we start with an idea or an opportunity or anything really, there is a high degree of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns, and therefore there's a lot of risk. And through discovery, we do a series of activities that help us gain more information, more knowledge about the thing. And in doing so, we reduce the level of uncertainty there is because we learn more about the thing. We may be validated. We learn that it's not a good idea and we bin the idea, right? So that's another great way to reduce risk. And that process of doing that gives us confidence in the idea and ultimately reduces risk. That's ultimately what product discovery is all about. It's about doing a series of activities like research, like user testing, etc., and spending time with our customers to gain confidence that this is really truly a problem that is worth solving and that this solution to that problem is ultimately, ideally, the best solution that we could come up with for now on it. Now, we know that product discovery is not bulletproof. So product discovery is not the only way we reduce risk. It is one of many ways we reduce risk, but we also have delivery, and we also reduce risk in delivery by breaking things down, by doing iterative and incremental development. And also, hopefully, we don't just release everything big bang to all of our customers. We can also do approaches like how we stage releases, and we do like beta groups and pilot groups, and we do stage releases, rollouts is what I'm saying, like stage rollouts where we roll out to 5%, then 10%, 20%, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are ways to reduce risk. But what we're going to focus on here is product discovery and the series of activities that we do in order to gain confidence in order to reduce that risk. Now, when we think about that and we think about product discovery and reducing risk, there is a pretty big spectrum. Well, for me, I think there's a pretty big spectrum between different things that we want to reduce risk about. So let me frame this. On one end of the scale, we have something like, how might we improve onboarding? So that's a challenge, that's a problem. Maybe onboarding is not great. Maybe we want to optimize it, whatever it is. But that's like one end of the spectrum. And the reason why I use this as an example, and it's just an example, that's all it is. If you think about this as a challenge or a problem space, improving onboarding would mean that we already have something, right? Which means we already have a product that's existing. So it's existing. So there's existing product, there's an existing onboarding process, there is existing users, perhaps. I'd be really hesitant as to why you'd be trying to improve onboarding if you don't have any customers yet. Maybe solve that problem first, but maybe onboarding is part of the problem. There's many things inside that. But in other words, something is existing. As a result of that, whilst there is unknowns, it's a known space. Like, it's an existing product. Maybe we know the market. Maybe we already have customers and we know those customers pretty well. We obviously built the onboarding process. So we clearly have some level of knowledge and understanding about what we built and the technology that we used to build it and, those types of things. So it's a relatively known space. As a result of that, there is still unknowns for sure, but there's less risk. And I'll say less, not low. So there's less risk because the onboarding process probably works to a degree already, and we're just trying to make it better, which means we're trying to optimize. And really, we're looking for like incremental improvements, right? And sorry if my my handwriting's terrible. So it's more of an existing space. It's known. Failure rate is probably lower, and we're really just trying to optimize an increment. Now, to contrast this, on the complete other end of the scale, and just an example, you might have something like what many of us are dealing with right now, which is like, oh, AI looks interesting, right? Now, I know AI is a solution. I'll get into this a little bit more, but AI is an interesting space, and it's a space that's new. It's not existing, right? So it's new. It could be existing depending on your company, but for most people out there, they don't have like a lot of AI stuff inside the company. They're probably not an AI company, and now we're looking at it. So for us, it's new, which means that there is a lot of unknown. For example, you might not have the skills to do AI right now. You might actually have to hire for those skills. So there's no skills and knowledge within the company around this thing. And I'm just using AI as an example, but there's a high degree of unknown, which means that there's more risk because, as I just mentioned before, the more unknowns there are, the more risk there is because there's just uncertainty. Generally in these spaces, it's a bit more volatile, but not necessarily. And we're not really looking to optimize. We're really looking to explore like what's possible. And if we do find something, we're really looking to disrupt. So we're really looking for like a paradigm shift. Like, can this disrupt what we are doing and, our company and all those types of things? And you know, to throw a buzzword in there, you might think like we're looking to innovate. I lost myself in that word for a second. And this is not an either or. These are both real things. And they're both challenges that we deal with all the time as product people, and they're both very important things. And what I've really just done here in a nutshell is basically tried to explain the difference between exploit and explore. And we actually have different problem spaces and different challenges when it comes to discovery. Some are more on the exploit side of the spectrum, and some are more on the explore side. Some are more known and existing, less risk, optimization, and others are more unknown, exploration. Oh my God, I don't know what we're doing. High chance of failure, very disruptive if we do actually manage to find some gold inside of it. But you've got to remember that explore has a really high chance of failure. So whatever you're exploring, there's a really high chance that we're going to look at 100 things and maybe come out with one that's worth doing, right? And this is a spectrum. And you can think of like moving from like, how might we improve onboarding? A next step there might be something like, you know, how might we increase engagement or churn? That's going to be really bad writing because this is a thick one. But those things are slightly hairier problem spaces than like improve onboarding. You're now like bigger. It might be conversion. And then getting even bigger could be like, well, we have this big hairy problem and we want to explore that problem space. It could be something like, we want to go international. That's a pretty big problem space. That is going to sit more on the explore side of the spectrum than how might we improve onboarding. And this is my point, that it's a spectrum. It's not, things don't quite always neatly drop into each bucket. But this is the continuum. And here's a sketch that some of you might have saw because I threw it in one of my posts. This was something that I put together, I wrote and did a post about many moons ago about this continuum. And it just kind of a list. It's not exhaustive. You can find, if you Google explore, exploit, trade-off, you'll find a lot of stuff. There's a lot of literature around it in like innovation spaces and that type of stuff. Not a new concept, but they'll have a different list, but all very similar kind of things. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this too is because not only are they very different challenges that we start with, the activities that we then do as part of product discovery can look and should look fundamentally different. So the differences here, and I can almost guarantee, just because I've seen a lot of different companies, especially as a coach and a consultant, and I've spoken to a lot of product people and work with product teams, I can almost guarantee that most of you are doing a lot of exploit stuff, and some of you might be only doing exploit. We could take a poll if we wanted to, but I'd imagine that is actually true. And that's okay. We'll get into that in a little bit. But these two have fundamentally different goals. On an exploit side of this fence, our ultimate goal is to solve a specific problem, right? So we normally start with a challenge and a problem, and our goal is to solve it. And because we have an existing product or an existing users, and that's why it's exploit, we're trying to exploit what we already have. Ultimately, we want to find a scalable solution to a specific problem. Now, you might dive into the problem, realize that it's not really a problem and bin the idea. That's totally true. That happens. You might also get in there and the problem space might change and morph as you go through discovery. But the end state, if it does progress from problem space to solution space, is to find a solution. And I also use the word scalable there deliberately because whilst the initial solution that you might come out with inside discovery might not be scalable, you might do something really quick and dirty, then you might get feedback, and then you might do some more discovery and then improve it and then do some more. And that's the whole process of continuous discovery and continuous delivery. Eventually, you need to get to a scalable solution. So eventually, you'll get to a point where you've changed onboarding, just still pick that example, and it's something that you can roll out to all your users and even future users as well. So that's ultimately the end state goal. Now, when you think about exploit, it's very common that it follows a design thinking kind of process. And for those who have a discovery process today, it probably looks a lot like that because a lot of discovery processes follow design thinking. And it wouldn't be a product talk if I don't do a Venn diagram or a double diamond. So there's your double diamond. We'll see if we can squeeze a Venn diagram in later. But you can think about like problem is what we're often thinking about, then solution, and then it's often something like discover or emphasize, and then it's like define, and then it's like ideate, and then test, test the prototype, or, maybe you have triple diamonds, and there's lots, but they all follow a very similar thing. Now, this works really well when you've got clear problem space to start with. We discover more about that problem space. We validate the problem space. We then hone in on opportunities, which is this middle bit. We define opportunities that we're going to try and solve. We ideate solutions. We test those solutions. And then we have a potentially scalable solution at the other end. And then we might do continuous discovery to iterate on that. Now, explore looks different though. It has a different goal. Explore is really focused on how might we explore what's possible, and to do so in a very rapid and lo-fi way. So I just saw the comment about Wardley mappings coming up. You can also think Wardley mappings, if you think about the Wardley map and you think about like productize and commodities and that type of stuff, is definitely exploit territory, and Genesis and early stage is explore. So for those who are familiar with Wardley mapping, is another mental model you can put here. But ultimately a completely different goal. We're trying to explore what's possible. So it's not uncommon inside explore that we might stop in this middle part here. We might actually just get to opportunities. Like the goal might just be to come up with like what opportunities exist. And let's just like we might not even get to the stage of actually trying to validate all of those opportunities. We might just want to explore what opportunities exist. And then those opportunities might be something that ends up in an opportunity backlog that we then exploit, and we then actually go through this process on. Now, another thing that changes with explore is explore can have multiple entry points. And this is why I used AI as an example. Whilst we can all agree that there's the saying that we should fall in love with the problem, not the solution, sometimes in explore, we might start with the solution. AI is a good example of that. We might start with the solution, which is AI, and then we might explore what problems we might solve with AI. But in order to do that, we need to learn more about AI, which means that rather than doing this nice double diamond process, we might just be tinkering with AI. We might just spend a couple of weeks just playing with it. Let's just learn more about it. Let's just try and do some stuff with it. And really the stuff that we do with it doesn't really matter, because our goal here is actually just to learn more about AI and to learn about its pros and cons and to build some knowledge and skills. So then we could start to use that knowledge to then be able to understand what opportunities might exist and what we might apply for it. So that's very different. Again, like we're just trying to gain knowledge. Another example would be that international one, right? Like if we want to expand in overseas, like that would then look a lot like market analysis, competitive analysis, market sizing, might do some, look at different behaviors in different countries and what are their spending habits and all that. What's the cultural difference? You might start looking at all those types of things. That is what you'll be doing in Explore. There's no specific like, hey, let's get into this country or that country. You're just exploring, well, what would it look like if we went international? What are the cultural barriers that we might have? What are the cultural differences? What competitors exist in different markets? And it's very just broad and it's very just exploratory, as the name suggests. One final example to go here too. Where exploit. So for those who joined the webinar last month, and I talked about user testing, user interviews, sorry, not user testing. We talked about user interviews last month. I talked about how, when you structure user interviews, do it in quite a structured way. We take like our assumptions, we come up with questions to ask in order to validate those assumptions. A lot of what I took you through last week is all in the exploit camp. I was talking to a product leader yesterday about this actually in a one-on-one call. And we're talking about actually user interviews across explore and exploit and the differences. You want to be very structured in the exploit space because you've got assumptions that you want to actually test and validate. And you want to just be efficient and effective. So if you ask 7 users the same questions, then you've got 7 data points that you can actually compare, and it's all comparable. And that is actually meaningful data to you. Explore, on the other hand, you might walk into user interviews much less structured. You might just have some general questions you want to ask, some really open-ended questions, but you might just let the conversation go down different tangents. And that's because you're exploring. You're just trying to learn more about your users or learn more about these people. They might not even be users. They could be like, some other market segment that aren't even customers right now. You just want to learn more about them. So as a result, you're okay with being unstructured. And you're okay that if 1 out of the 10 people you spoke to, they said something, and you asked them a question and they said something that you didn't ask the other 9 people. And you're okay with that in Explore, because in Exploit, you're not okay with that because you don't know if that person's just like a weirdo or they have something weird in some unique context that makes them do that thing. And because you don't know that, it's hard to know if that data point is valuable or not. In Explore, you're okay with it because you're not trying to really validate that single data point. You're okay that like, oh, that was interesting. And again, that might become an opportunity that you go, well, let's actually explore that further. Let's then dive into that further. So then you might do some more interviews afterwards and then ask 10 people the same question to then validate that or verify it. But at the beginning, you don't mind. You're okay with just exploring and just going wide and asking different things. Other simple examples here are like going and observing customers without having any intent. Like you don't have, I want to observe them doing X. That's very Exploit. Explore is like, I'm just going to go sit with them for a day and just take it in. Let's just see what's happening. Maybe I pick something interesting up. And you can see how here this maps back to what I had before and where I talked about there's a high failure rate. Because you can spend a day with customers and learn nothing. I'm sure you're going to learn something, but it might not be anything groundbreaking. You might just spend a day with them and you're like, oh, I picked up some interesting stuff, but nothing revolutionary. However, there'll be this one time that you do an activity like that and you do actually pick up something quite revolutionary and quite disruptive. And that's the purpose of Explore and why we should always be doing Explore as well as Exploit. So it's not an either or, we need to be doing both. I want to tell you a story about this. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to steal a story from Rory Sutherland. He told a story at a talk when he was talking about Explore and Exploit, and he shared a story about bees. And I actually decided to go and verify this and actually did some of my own research around bees because I was very curious whether this was actually true. So I did. So here's a story about bees. Did you know, fun fact, everyone's going to learn something today, unless you're like a zoologist and you know a lot about bees, and then apologies, you can probably tell this story better than I can. So bees communicate to each other. And one of the ways that they communicate is they do what is known as the waggle dance. Now, I can only assume that they came up with the name waggle dance because they do a little dance and they wag, and the series of movements is like communicating. So bees communicate to each other. So what they do, let's say a bee goes and finds a whole bunch of flowers. They would then do the waggle dance. They'll communicate to other bees to be like, hey, there's flowers here. Like, hey, everyone get over here and exploit these flowers. Now, to the bafflement of bee scientists, they couldn't understand why there are a percentage of bees, and just to get a little bit deeper here from my own research, and very interestingly enough, that percentage changes based on the environment. So different environments will have more compliant bees and less compliant bees. So a percentage of bees weren't compliant. They just wouldn't follow the waggle dance. They'll just ignore it. Like there's a bee dancing and they're like, bugger you, I'm going to keep flying. Now, they're baffled by this because if you think about like evolution, you think about like Darwinism, that type of stuff, survival of the fittest, you would think that the hives that have the highest level of compliance, where they could, everyone went and exploited all those flowers, they would have the most effective and strongest and biggest hives. But that's not actually the reality. And the reason for that is because the world that we live in is not a very stable environment. That's the word I was looking for. It's not a stable environment. We live in a very volatile and uncertain environment. So what happens to flowers? Well, sometimes there's a drought and the flowers die. Sometimes there's a flash flood and the flowers die. Sometimes there's a goat of herds that come in and they eat all the flowers. Now, the reason why some bees, a percentage of bees, ignore the waggle dance is because they keep flying and they keep exploring. And every now and then they will find new sources of pollen. So a bee finds all these flowers, they start doing the waggle dance, and one just ignores them and they keep flying. And let's say they don't even fly that far. They fly like 100 meters down the road. 100 meters down the road, they find an even bigger patch of flowers, like 10x. Now, if you only did exploit and you didn't have those rogue bees that went and did their own thing, you never would find that other patch of flowers. You never would find something else. Equally, if everyone was exploiting this one patch of flowers and there was suddenly a flood and the flowers died, well, the hive is screwed. They're now, all dependent on that. So the reason why bees don't follow, not all bees follow the waggle dance, is because of this explore and exploit. They know, nature has programmed them to know that some need to exploit, we definitely need to do that, and others need to explore. And what was even more fascinating when I started reading about this was they don't know for certain. So they're not sure, but they believe that the reason why the amount of bees that actually follow and that basically obey or disobey changes based on different environments is because of the level of volatility in that environment. One of the working theories is that they can actually just sense whether the environment is more unstable versus more stable environments. And as a result of that, they will, if it's less stable and more volatile, they'll have more bees that don't listen and more bees that explore because they need to explore. They understand that exploring more often is more important. So going back to this, because a question that surely is going to come up is, well, how much time should I dedicate to explore versus exploit? And the story is a good one, not because it also illustrates the point about why explore and exploit is so important. It also illustrates that this isn't really like a easy question to answer because it depends on your environment. If you're in an environment where there's a lot of volatility and there's a lot of disruption, then I would recommend doing more explore than explore. Not necessarily more explore than exploit, but I'll be doing a high percentage. So I'll give you some yardsticks because everyone's probably looking for them. Most companies that I observed that do this, I don't think I've ever seen a company to spend more than 20 to 30% on explore. It makes total sense that the majority of your time, like 80+%, is going to, I'll change that to 70. 70+% is going to exploit because we got to optimize what we already have. Let's be honest, this is where all of our money is coming from. The products and services that we have today. So we need to keep exploiting them. We need to keep solving problems inside of them. We need to keep making them better. So it makes sense that the majority of our time and revenue is spent there. Now, we need to spend some time doing explore because if we don't, we are open to disruption. Interestingly enough, you can think of like Kodak. Kodak was doing explore. They were building digital cameras before anybody else. But where they failed was not necessarily that they didn't do explore, was that they didn't do anything about it. They ended up suppressing it and killing it. But we should be doing an element of explore. Now, I often see companies at the most do 20 to 30%, but I've seen very small, even like 2% all the way up to that. And when I say 2%, that could be like they have one team that does it. And that's just X amount of revenue that goes to funding that team. But at least they're doing something. I think if you're doing something is better than nothing. So to just touch on some of these things, because different constructs, you might be wondering, how do we do this? So I think at an absolute table stake level, based on my experience and what I've seen, all of the product teams, so the teams that own their products, they should be doing an element of both explore and exploit. But they'll be doing it based on their area. There is going to be things that are completely outside of what they look at. Things like AI. There'll be other things, right? Ideas and opportunities, maybe new product ideas or new markets, that type of stuff that nobody's touching already. For these spaces, a lot of times companies, and I've helped companies actually set this up, they'll have like an explore team. We don't often call it an explore team. We like to give them fancier names like emerging tech team or something like that. But their job is to look at it, like basically to just do explore all the time. They're going to have a backlog. Sometimes people might input things into the backlog like, hey, can you look at AI? Can you look at this? Can you look at that? And they'll just chew through it. They kind of want to And again, their goal is to do this as rapidly as possible and to do it in the most lo-fi way as possible and as quickly as possible, because there's going to be a high failure rate. So really, they just want to like bin. Oh, okay, this one looks interesting. Let's keep exploring that further. So very different goal. So the reason why you do this construct is because often you don't want to annoy the other product teams with all of that information, because you could be looking at things that are completely not in their space, like look at international markets and stuff. And if you give it to every single product team, they're always doing a lot of context switching, and that's not great. Sometimes too, you might need specific skills. So like AI is a good example where you might need specific skills. So you might hire some people to go in that team or create a new team that looks at that. And often their job is either to validate or do a first level of validation of opportunities. Sometimes their job's actually to deliver an MVP. So they actually would deliver to the market. Sometimes their role actually ends after product market fit. So they'll get it to product market fit and then they might hand it over to somebody else. Sometimes as well, the team might get it to product market fit and then they might stay with that product. So what you'll do is you'll spin up a new product team that will own it. Now, that could be, you might hand it over to an existing team, or you might spin up a new team, or the team that was already doing it might be the team that continues to look after it. And you might spin up a new team that does more, that does explore again. I want to touch on all these constructs because this might be new to some of you. And this is something that I often work with product leaders on. I just thought I'd touch on it because you might be wondering how this starts to work. But this is really important. And this is why, even though I think at a base level expectation, product teams should be doing explore and exploit for their areas, we often also still have a team on the side that does explore, because they might end up creating a whole new product. And if we give it to a product team, then suddenly they're juggling two products, and that's not super efficient and not super effective, I should say, in particular. So we just don't want to make people context switch. So then if it ends up being a new product, then cool, let's then invest in that new product. Hopefully it's given us a return on investment and we can see profitability from it. And then at that point, great, we can actually build a team around that. And then either that team goes back to doing explore activities, or we end up having a whole new team, or they continue with it. And it's not a whole new team. It will be them plus new people. You start adding people into the team. So that's another reason, is you want to keep it small, keep investment small. So it might be 3 or 4 people. This should be a cross-functional product team. So it's not just like designers or anything like that. It should be, we should have engineers in there, that type of stuff. Here, this is where I can fit the Venn diagram, because we need to do, DVF, desirability, viability, feasibility. So that's why you want all of those skills in that team. And the last thing that I was going to say on this as well, it's also often very different skills. Like it's more market analysis and not user testing. It's like market analysis and opportunity assessments and that type of stuff, and rapid prototyping, which are all actually skills in themselves. And you'll find, and I've found some people in my career that are like this, there are some people who love to do that and are really good at it. And putting those people in product teams, they don't like building scalable, scalable code, for example, like from an engineer point of view. They just like, quick and dirty, rapid prototyping. So this is a great career space as well for those types of people. Same with product people. There's product people who love this. This is very 0 to 1 space versus like grow a product, growth space or a mature space. So it is also very different skills. That's what I wanted to take you through. Ended up being a little bit longer than I originally planned, but I can see some questions already. Whilst I start to pivot towards those questions, think if there are any questions, throw them in the chat. And it's actually a really good question, Mohammed. So questions are flowing in. I'm going to assume that was actually the delay that I had, because there's a delay on the stream. It's like, I don't know how long, 20, 30 odd seconds or something like that is what I know. So how do you define success criteria? So this is a really good question, Mohammed. This is actually something that is very difficult. So I'm glad you asked this question. In exploit, absolutely, you can define measures of success. You can define, You can define like what are we trying to solve, and like how would we measure that, and what is the potential return on investment even, right? Like if we solve this problem, what do we think the return on investment is? That works really well in exploit. I'll make it a bit tangible for you if you're still wondering what I mean by that. Let's say that you have a churn problem. Just picking another problem space. Now, if you've got a churn problem and you can quantify, like if we reduce churn by X amount, that is going to give us X amount of revenue because we got like, more customers staying, so recurring revenue goes up. So that is an example of how you can quantify it. You can define the success measures up front, and then you can actually do a bunch of discovery, try something, see if you actually have reduced churn by that much. You're going to try again and try again. And, if you think about things like Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree, that works really well for that type of stuff. And so yes, you can absolutely measure exploit. Explore, on the other hand, is actually very hard to measure. In fact, if you asked me a few years ago, I would have disagreed with this statement, but it's something I've changed my perspective on. I don't actually think you can measure it. Like, how do you measure, like if you take the bee example, how do you measure that if we have 10% of bees that just like fly around randomly and they find alternative food sources for us, that we get X amount of return? Like, you could try to measure that in the past when we've had 10% of bees, about once every 100 days, we find a new alternative food source. But that's actually like it would be kind of a made up metric, because if you try it again in the future in a different environment, that 100 days might become 50 days, but it could also become 500 days. Like you don't really know what the future holds in the uncertain, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So the challenge with Explore is there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a high risk of failure. So it's very hard to measure and quantify up front. And I don't think anyone, like I haven't really found any way to measure it up front. And like I said, if you asked me a few years ago, I would have just like listened to myself saying this now, and I would have been like, what are you talking about? No, you need to measure it. We need to be able to have tangible outcomes. We need to understand return on investment. I've changed my perspective on this. I actually think in this space, if you chase always having to quantify it up front, you will never do Explore, because there's just too much uncertainty. So you'll just be making it up and there's too much uncertainty. Instead, I think of it this way. I think of it as like a product portfolio strategy perspective. If we have all of our eggs in the one basket and we're only exploiting what we already have, and we're never exploring what's possible, and we're never exploring new frontiers and new ideas, then we miss out on those opportunities. We end up in that local maximum where we just always are locally optimizing, and then suddenly, Netflix comes out of nowhere with video streaming, and we're standing there like Blockbuster, like, oh my God, where did this come from? Yeah. So I think you need to dedicate it. And I see it from a portfolio level, I see it as a cost to the business in order to make sure that we don't get disrupted. So that's why I think if you think in allocation and you think in just, can we invest this amount of money into a team or into a space where we explore? And even from a product manager point of view and a product team, if I'm on a product team, I'll be thinking, let's just make sure that we do some explore discovery every now and then. Let's create like a bucket of explore stuff. Let's even just have a day where we don't have an agenda. We're just going to go speak to a bunch of customers, and we're not trying to test all these hypotheses. Let's just go and do that. So that is how I would use it, and just make sure that some percentage of our time is going to that. Now, the more volatile your space is, the more time you're going to have to give to it. But it's very hard to measure the success up front. You can always measure it after the fact when you become Netflix and you do the video streaming and you're like, oh, great, look how amazing we are. It's easy to do that after the fact, but doing it beforehand, I don't think you can. I think you got to believe in it, and I think you got to drive towards it. Cool. Got some questions, some more questions. They're all flooding in. So when I say the cross-functional team, how do you ideally have the flow when you are exploring, you want to make the time? So this is where I would say that this team, this is where I think the skills are different in this team. In this space, you're going to have data scientists. You're going to have some. In fact, I would highly encourage having data scientists in this team. You want this team to be really lean. Like, I'll give you some examples of the constructs of these teams that I've worked in. I've worked in a team as small as just the product trio. It was literally a product manager, an engineer, and a designer. I've also worked where there was 2 designers, a product manager, 2 engineers, and a data scientist. It's probably the biggest version of this team. Now, the way that this team works is it's actually highly collaborative. So we do everything together. So when we're interviewing customers and like we go and spend a day with customers, it wouldn't be unusual for all of us to go. Now, if the team's a bit bigger, like at that 5 mark, maybe some engineers might stay back and they might just like, they'll go, okay, while you guys are interviewing, I might just like, I'm looking at this thing. I'm just gonna like explore this new technology, whatever it is. Like, I'll just pick AI as an example. They'll be like, I'm just going to try and get a proof of concept going of using AI to do X. And in this team, this is a difficult thing. And this is why I like Rory's story. He did a better job to tell it about the bees. He talks about like how these bees can look super inefficient. Like they're just exploring. Like, what are they doing? Like they're just ignoring us. Like, what are they, like half the time they just fly around. They never bring anything back. Like, you know, who are these bees? They're just not efficient at all. And it's easy to look at them and think that it's inefficient. And then the one day that they find something and it's an absolute goldmine, then you're like, oh my God, thank God. I can't believe we had them. That was amazing. You know, they look like the town hero. And this is actually one of the things that happens with this team, because you'll just say, okay, cool. Do your proof of concept. Like, sure, whatever. And just like let people explore and tinker and play with things and try new things. And this is the intent. Like the idea is for them to just like find things and do it. So it may feel very inefficient and maybe ineffective, but that's kind of the point. It's not really a team that it's not a space either. Like when you're doing explore, it's not a space that you're trying to optimize. Absolutely not optimized. In fact, it's far from it. It's like the complete opposite. So anytime I've because like especially when I was at agency side, we did a lot of these types of projects and did a lot of work like this, but we would just like try things and like somebody in the team would just have an idea to be like, hey, I'm just like, especially from like an engineering point of view, to be like, I'm just gonna see if I can get a proof of concept running on blah. And as a team, you're like, okay, go for it. Like you're not really trying to be like, is that the most valuable thing for you to be spending your time on? I think we should be doing this and that. It's you're exploring. Like you don't know. So you're like, be curious. And that's probably a very important trait for the people in the teams, is to be curious and to try new things. And just to give some other examples, some non-engineering examples, we at some of these spaces that we did, we went for a walk one day. We just like went for a walk and was like, let's just go and observe some people down near the harbor. And the intent was just to try and see if it would spur some inspiration. So it was like half a day. We're just going to take a couple of hours, go down. And it seems so random, but that was kind of like the intent, was just to see if it could generate some inspiration. If it could generate something, then once we got back to the office after lunch, we would actually try and do something around that. And again, try and do it as rapidly as possible. So yeah, and then data scientists could be doing something like crunching some numbers or looking at something. There's plenty around that. Hopefully that answers the question. And it's difficult until you've really seen it. I feel like that's for sure. Cool. 10 minutes. Yeah, let me touch on this one. I'll give some other examples. So user interviews look very different. Other examples are like, definitely in explore space, you're doing a lot of like, not necessarily, maybe proof of concepts is the wrong word there. You're doing a lot of prototypes. And an example of that is like, you don't care if the prototype is plugged into everything, whether it has real data. You don't even care if the data is representative. Like if the data set was like the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, like all the way through the alphabet, and you got it to produce something because that's what you're trying to do, then that's probably good enough. And then the next step would be to then actually start to add more layers onto it and start to make it some more real data set, and then start to think about how we would actually integrate it and all that type of stuff. And eventually along those lines, you might hit a point where you realize that it's not feasible anymore. But really early stage, you're just playing around with it and you're just trying to get it to work. And often it's very lo-fi. It's not representative. It's very easy to look at and shoot down because you're like, well, that's not real data and customers wouldn't really do that and all that type of stuff. But you're just trying to validate and take stats forwards as rapidly as possible. Some other examples are, I think, market analysis and stuff that you'll be doing as a product manager in particular is stuff that looks very different. Like, again, you'd be doing a lot of like competitive analysis, market analysis in that space, trying to understand, you might just be exploring, like maybe just reading about AI more and take an AI course, or, look at some data around how big the AI market is and is it growing? I'm just using AI as an example. But that's very much explore. Like you don't really have an intent there. You're just saying, like, is the market, is it a big market? Is it a good opportunity? Is it growing? Is it not? Who's the players in this space? You're just trying to learn more. Maybe you're going to use some of their products. And, I call them competitors, but they're not competitors today because you're not doing anything in that space. So it's actually funny to even call them competitors because they're not. But you'll be thinking, like, who are the players in this space and what are they doing? And let's have a look at it and let's see. So that's another example. Some other different examples would be, you might be doing ideation, but ideation, again, you might be, less like, you could just be coming up with like crazy ideas. Like, it doesn't need to be that real. We did one, like, we thought we decided to explore some AR stuff. I wish I could quickly pull up the photo, but I can't. Our designer came up with a great idea of doing ideation. So if you do like a sketch in Crazy Eights, where you do 8 different sketches, some of you might be familiar with that, but you can Google it, Crazy Eights, or sketching, a ideation technique. She had the brilliant idea of actually creating 8 boxes where she cut them out and she actually put like a piece of plastic on the top. So we could draw on it and then you could hold it and it would be like, augmented reality. And that was what she did for an ideation exercise, which was in Explore, was very much an Explore ideation exercise. And that was really cool. I never thought about doing something like that. It was really brilliant, I should say, to be able to ideate around augmented reality and to be able to just, like, again, that's super lo-fi, rapid, like, what does that feel like? And it's so far from representative. It's so far from like what this would actually look like in reality and what's actually true or not and feasible. But like, it makes sense in that space when you're just exploring. So hopefully that answers it. If I might give it some more thought and give you some more in like the comments and reply. If you need some more, let me know and I'll do it. That looks like an interesting post. I'm going to read that. This is quite a powerful question because I run into teams like this a lot, where they have been very much execution mode. They've been very much exploit. It's been something that they're doing, I think that's a reality for a lot of teams out there, and they've done very little, probably no explore. How do you make time and space for it? My way of making time and space for it is to just carve out the space. Now, you can create a cadence on it. So if you, maybe once every quarter, we have some time dedicated to explore. Another example of this actually is I've worked in spaces where, hackathons are a great example of it. Like, especially the really free going hackathons. Some companies don't do hackathons in an explore way. They're doing it in an exploit way. Like, they give it like a theme, like everyone has to do like a hackathon around, acquiring more customers or something like that, right? But if you really have like unshackled hackathon, that is very much explore. That is like, you can do whatever you want. You can, and which, by the way, a lot of companies have created products from those things. Like, I'm pretty sure Gmail or something was created that way. Somebody created like a mail client in a Google hackathon. I could be wrong. Somebody will correct me about that. But like, and that's the point. Like, if it's unshackled and you really let people do anything, then you start to realize, oh, maybe this could actually be something. And then you turn it into exploit. So the reason why I'm using hackathon as an example is not to say make the team do a hackathon. A hackathon works because we create the space. We basically say once a quarter or whatever the cadence is, once a year, we create 24 hours of space where people can do explore. People can literally do whatever they want. Now, from a more product team point of view, you might want to put a little bit more structure around that, but the same principle applies. How do you create some space for the team to be able to just to do some explore? And that could be let's say, and I've worked in this construct too, where we would have a couple of days at the end of every quarter that will be, places have called it different things. I worked at a place where we used to call it an innovation sprint. And I know innovation sprint has other connotations, but we truly used it this way, which was like the time is your own. You've got a couple of days where as a team, you can do whatever you want. And everyone will have different things that they want to do. And ideally, it'll be better if as a product team, we actually create like little sub teams, and it's not everyone doing individual things, but it's also not we're all doing the one thing. It depends on how big your team is. Like if you have a team of 8, it'll be really nice if you broke up into 2 to 3 groups, maybe even 4, but 2 to 3 groups, and you did different things. And you just spent 2 to 3 days exploring. And like I said, activities can be, okay, during those 2 to 3 days, we're going to have one day where we're going to go out to a customer site and we're just going to observe them for the day. No agenda. We're just going to observe them. See if we pick up something. And somebody else might want to do something else. Like I want to spend the day learning about this thing that I keep reading about that I think is really, really interesting. And I just want to learn more about it. So let's go learn more about it. And then you never know, that could turn into something that we should actually do something about. But I really like, days where I go and spend time with customers where I don't really have an agenda. I'm just like spending more time with them. Days where I just, do some very exploratory market research where I might be just looking at different markets or different competitors or people that aren't even competitors at that time, but just spend some time, like carve out the time is generally my rule of thumb, and just create a cadence around it once a quarter, even start with like half a day or one day. I think if you want to start in place, I would start with 1 day a quarter. You do something like go out to a customer site and depend on your product and spend some time with customers and no agenda, just spend some time with them. Hopefully that answers it too. Let me know if you want some other suggestions around that. Keen, now we got 2 minutes. I might having a look. Yeah, so I'll touch on this one. I think is probably the most valuable one. And then the rest I'll get into the comments and actually reply. Honestly, I mean, I didn't create OST. So OST is Opportunity Solution Tree, which is Teresa Torres's Opportunity Solution Tree. It'd probably be a really interesting conversation to have with Teresa Torres, actually. Maybe I'll try and line that up. If somebody else ever manages to, let me know, ask the question. Because by no means am I an expert on Opportunity Solution Tree. I didn't create it. But for me, Opportunity Solution Tree works really well in the exploit space, not in the explore. So I think it's a great discovery tool. And like I said, the majority of your discovery is going to be exploit anyways. That's just fact. 60+%, 70+% is going to be exploit, even in those really volatile environments. But OST to me is very much an exploit tool, not necessarily an explore tool. So that's how I would probably answer that. It doesn't really fit into it because we're not defining an outcome and then breaking it down from there. It's more like let's spend some time there. Cool. I'm going to go through the rest of the comments and reply to anybody that I missed. Appreciate everyone turning out. Appreciate for another webinar. It's always amazing to do this every month and to be able to have these conversations and to dive into these topics. This topic is quite a tricky and an advanced topic to a degree, but I think it's a really important one. And it's something that I spend so many times with so many product teams that I find that they're not doing it, right? Like they're only doing exploit. And I think as a company, you're really missing out on these opportunities. And that's the reason why I mentioned before, I have actually helped companies actually build this out and actually have an explore team and actually start to do more explore inside their product teams, because basically they're sitting vulnerable. If you're not doing explore, to me, you're vulnerable right now. Now, the businesses have ebbs and flows, so there's times where maybe you're just doubling down on what you have and you have no time and capacity to do explore. But stay in that mode for too long and it's really dangerous is what I'll say. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for turning out. Thanks for another great month and another great webinar. If you have any feedback on it, if you enjoyed it, let me know. It's a really good barometer for me to know as well. If you got any suggestions for a topic for a future webinar, also keen to hear them as well. So throw those things in the comments. And I'm going to leave it at that. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate the time. And I'll see you hopefully in the next one, a future one. So yeah. Have a good rest of your day, wherever you are, whether that's night, morning, day, evening. Yeah, enjoy. Thanks again.